Join the community-shaping craft spirits, membership that meets you where you are and grows with you. Visit distilling.com and become part of the movement today.
I'm going to bring Joshua Berman on. He is the founder and creative director of Punch Design Company, has been doing a lot of work in the spirits industry, adult beverage industry, and we're going to chat about how you can build an RTD brand.
Brandon, thanks very much. I appreciate it. Thanks very much for the kind introduction, and it's great to be here chatting about RTDs with all of you guys. We did do a presentation a couple months ago about brand development, generally speaking, and we will touch on some of the things we spoke about a couple months ago again, because the process applies whether you're doing a traditional spirits brand or an RTD. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to make sure that everybody can see it. That should do the trick. Okay. So like he said, if you have any questions throughout the process, drop them into the chat. We can address them at the end. I already have a bunch of questions that ADI prompted that they wanted to make sure that I addressed, that I'm going to use at the end of the conversation. And so we might cover them. But if not, we'll make sure we go through that chat and make sure that we hit it up. Additionally, at the end of the presentation, we can send this PDF, the presentation I'm going to do, as a PDF to you guys. And I think they're going to be even recording this so you can reference little details. Some of the slides we'll look at during the case study portion have a lot of fine detail on them because they're recaps of actual behind the scenes conversations that we had in our brand strategy projects past. I'm not going to take the time to read every word on every slide because we're getting an overview of the creative process. But if you want to look at the PDFs, you're welcome to. And you can get in there and look at the fine detail of how we talked through and thought about each of these strategic decisions. So just a quick bit of background. I won't belabor this. I run a creative agency called Punch Design Co. It's a decentralized agency. I've been in the creative space since about 2008 or so, and I've run my agency since about for about 10 years now. We focus on food and beverage. More than half of that is beverage, and the world of RTDs is super fun and rewarding to work in. So I'm really excited that you guys have let me spend a little bit of time here today. Here's just some sample of some of my experience, just so you guys can get a little bit of background. I have a creative director background, but whenever we work with our clients, we're doing everything from initial brand strategy and product strategy all the way to the marketplace. So everything that our clients need to get all the way to market. So big picture, whenever we talk about brand development, what I'm about to talk about applies to RTDs, but is actually a little bit broader. We talk about this same process for all of our clients, whether they're doing RTDs or a more traditional spirits brand, or craft beer, soda, or snack foods, you name it. So when people talk about brand development, we're talking about the art of getting all of this stuff that's on my screen, getting all of this in sync. Okay, we want to build a brand that connects with the consumer, which means we need all of these moving parts to be pointed in the same direction. There's three big chunks: our core brand assets, our shelf presence, and then brand expression. So whenever we talk core brand assets for, let's say, RTDs, you're talking about your name or names, whether that's the meta name of your whole brand or individual products, the logo or logos you're using, the color palettes of the brand or the products, and then the style, the tone of voice, the personality, the story that goes behind it, your unique value proposition, your sense of place. All of these things are combined to create your core brand assets. And usually whenever somebody says, get a style guide for your brand, they're talking about all of these things organized in one really useful package, but they're also organized in such a way where whenever you talk about your brand or write about it, whenever you write advertising copy, you have an idea of how you're supposed to sound. What are the features that you're supposed to talk about or lead with? And what's the personality? What's the tone of voice? All that working together. Number two is shelf presence, which is the way that your product looks on the shelf, whether that is in a store or whether that is online. It's the product itself. So for RTDs, it's usually cans. The title of this, this webinar we're doing is just Can It, but there's some RTD brands that are doing well in glass. They're slightly more premium. They're targeting a different occasion. They're targeting a different sense of place. We're talking about the labels, the way that it's decorated, any caps or enclosures, any boxes that it comes in. How does it look whenever it's sitting on the shelf in a mixed pack or by itself? Any illustrations or photography that goes on the product. Maybe they're really rich. Maybe they're really simple and graphic. That and the core brand assets, they go hand in hand. The style, the creative style and tone of voice, all that works together. The third is what we call brand expression. And this is any other way that a customer or potential customer would come in contact with your brand. You might call it a touch point. So it could be straight up an advertisement, straight up advertising. It could be your social media presence. It's any video that you make that goes online, any photography, any photo shoots that you do, whether it's product or lifestyle. This could be partnerships, whether that is with an online influencer or some type of celebrity, but it could also be some sort of nonprofit or mission-driven organization that aligns with the overall story of the brand. This could be retail partners, retail locations as part of that brand expression. This could be this is your point of purchase, the way the product looks whenever you interact with it in a retail environment, if you have a special point of purchase presentation. And if we're going to build a brand that has real fans, merchandise is going to be part of that as well. So whenever we say brand development in this webinar or otherwise, we're talking about the art of getting all those moving parts. And that's a fair bit of moving parts, getting them all to go in the same direction. Whenever a customer interacts with any of those touch points, they're getting the same story. They're getting the same style. This makes it memorable over time. It makes it easy to find, whether you're hunting for it online or on the shelf, easy to spot in the wild, and it can begin to carry a meaning over time. So whenever we go through our little case study, I'm going to show you how we were able to do that for one of my clients, how we have all of these moving parts pointing in the same direction. And then we'll look at a couple other, RTD specific things. I expect we have two groups here today. The first group is just weighing the idea of RTDs. I can't see the chat at the moment, but if you guys want, you could say, yes, I'm in group one or I'm in group two. Group one is, I'm just weighing this as an idea. Maybe I already run a distillery or I don't. I'm considering entering this market. Either I might have a lot of experience or I might not, but I don't even know how I should think about these things. Should I view RTDs as an extension of my current distillery's brand, or should I think of it as an entirely different brand or a different business that stands alone? Why does this whole brand development process matter? All those three chunks that you talked about on the previous slide, why do they even matter whenever I'm building RTD? That's group number one. Group number two has already decided to launch an RTD. You might have a single recipe. You might already have a dozen. Maybe you don't even have a recipe at all, but you've decided, okay, this is a market that makes sense for us for one reason or another. We're going to go into it. We've already more or less figured out how it's going to go with our operations. Maybe I've already got distributors on board. I've already got a cool partnership, whatever. We just need to know how we're going to design it. How much does it cost? I already understand that brand development is valuable. I just need to know how we're going to do it. So what I'm going to do is speak to group number two first, walk through this process. And my hope is that by the end of it, the people in group number one will understand why all of that is important, why that matters. And we can start answering some of those questions like, should I consider my RTDs just a brand extension? Is this my same distillery name, but it's just a few different new product offerings? Or am I thinking about this entirely differently? So without any further ado, let's dive into our first case study, which we could spend 2 hours on, but I'm going to go through it relatively quickly. This is one of those PDFs that I can send you guys after the fact if you want to pour over every single page. But I'll hop over here. I'm actually going to pull this first case study from the world of craft beer. The reason I'm pulling this case study is because it's was quite successful, but also because I've got a lot of documentation and it shows a really thorough example of how we developed each of these assets. In fact, on the screen, you're going to see some actual samples of actual meetings that we had in our strategy process. So before we ever develop for an RTD or any product, creative, meaning logos, packaging design, styles, we're talking about brand strategy and product strategy. We want to identify a unique value proposition. We talk about our price point. We really dig into the competition, what the marketplace actually looks like. And in the middle of figuring out how do we communicate, while we're figuring out that unique value proposition, we then begin to think about how that unique value proposition gets communicated. And we start hunting for voids. Like, what are there things in the market that nobody has claimed yet, whether it is words or ideas or flavors or colors? All these things start to come into the mix. We call this the mind, soul, body process because we're working from the inside out. The inside is this why. Why is somebody going to choose us on the shelf over anybody else? All the way out to the what we're communicating to somebody. So after we go, as we're going through this, we're not just talking about creative style. We're also talking about these sort of watchwords, this language of how we want to talk about the brand. So whenever I started working with Bearded Iris, this is the example I'm going to use. They're a craft brewer that's in Nashville, Tennessee. When they first approached me a few years ago, the stuff that was on the screen is what they had. They had one product that was doing pretty well called Homestyle. It represented, I think, close to half of their volume already. So they knew they had a recipe that had a little bit of traction that they really liked and that the customers liked. But their style wasn't really communicating anything unique about that particular product or about their brand as a whole. So we started digging into the strategy process that I'm talking about. We identified something that was unique about the way they brewed beer, but also the mentality of the ownership. This turned out to be a phrase called less is way, way more, which is just this idea of really stripping things back to the essentials, focusing on some core ideas and not having a lot of extraneous detail, whether that's in the recipe or in the brand itself. So all of this tiny text that's on your screen, you're not going to be able to read it. If you want to dig into the PDF, you're welcome to. But this is an actual screenshot of some of our strategy meetings at the very beginning. This is a second meeting where we start to dig into creative style. Once we'd established this core strategy statement of less is way, way more, that began to be fleshed out a little more. And so you can see on this slide, you won't be able to read. It says things like rarity, style, and thoughtfulness. Cultivate variety, understated opulence. We wanted to communicate this idea of a really rich drinking experience that is subtle and sophisticated. If somebody walks around saying, I'm sophisticated, that is going to give you the opposite inclination, actually. So we want to have this understated quality to everything about the brand, from the brand name and logos all the way through their flagship product, which is Homestyle. So for this product or project, we're just doing the big picture brand strategy, identity design, and then packaging design for a single SKU. So this is a little bit of creative exploration of how we eventually got to our logos. You can see how we went through rounds of revision and slowly refined it until we got to a look that really communicated what we wanted to. So here is Bearded Iris. I'm actually going to hop over to my website really quickly. Let's go back to our, okay. There we go. I'm going to share my screen again. Sorry about that. The screen share stopped. So if we go to Bearded Iris, you can see this is what Homestyle looks like now. So this product, whenever we designed it, the company actually made a brand rule where Homestyle as a logo or as a brand could only ever be displayed metallic gold on a black background. That was a rule that they made. This is part of the brand personality. This is part of the strategy that we were discussing, because it reinforces this understated opulence, this really rich experience, which means you're not allowed to print the logo black on a white piece of paper. You're just not allowed to do it. And so whenever you see even trucks rolling down the highway, they all have that same look. So recently, we ended up developing a campaign that actually goes on the side of trucks. So you have a big photo of Homestyle on the left, a tagline, made in Tennessee for Tennessee. You have a partnership with 10 Green Land Conservancy through 1% for the Planet. And then a secondary tagline, every Homestyle helps keep Tennessee green, all over a photo of these iconic Tennessee locations. So every aspect of this touch point, of this one side of a truck, is pulling in the same direction. You have a product whose very name is Homestyle. It connects with the state of Tennessee because it says home right there. The main tagline, made in Tennessee for Tennessee, is literally on top of an image of iconic Tennessee spots. Their partnership is with 1% for the Planet, and most of the money goes to 10 Green, which is a nonprofit dedicated to preserving parts of Tennessee. And then you have this two-part secondary headline, every Homestyle helps keep Tennessee green. Each that can be read as one sentence or two sentences. So every aspect of this touch point is pulling in the same direction. which is connecting this popular beer with the state. All that story is telling the same thing. So go back to that first slide we looked at, our 3 chunks, our core brand assets, our shelf presence, and then our brand expression. This is a perfect summary of them all pulling in the same direction. And Homestyle is now the #1 selling craft beer in the state of Tennessee. Whenever we started a few years ago, maybe 7 years ago, they weren't. They knew they had something there. They had a recipe that was relatively popular, but their commitment to really pulling in the same direction with this brand over the long haul and the quality of the recipe, combined with what I think is some pretty killer looking art, has made this product really, really successful. So that was a very quick summary of a process that took quite some time, and to this day, has been leading them really, really good results. Okay, so that is the case study for Bearded Iris. Let's go back to these others. So I've got 2 more quick case studies specifically related to the world of RTDs. Not really case studies, just samples. So Libre is #1. Let's get back to, here we go. This is an RTD that I did a few years ago. This is a very classic rum and cola product that we named Libre. And you can tell that the focus of this particular brand design was on the heritage of the recipe. We even, have a Cuban flag on there. The whole story is about the ingredients. We've got, this 3 years aged rum story on it. And I think the product itself looks really, really cool, especially in close-up, as you can see. But this product did not really fly off the shelf whenever we launched it. It is possible that the theory of the product was incorrect. We thought that people who wanted to buy rum and colas in a can really cared about the quality of the rum. And I think that hypothesis might have been wrong. This product might have done way better in a glass bottle, like a more current RTD, like On the Rocks. So you guys might be familiar with this brand. All of their stuff is in glass, and it's these pre-mixed RTDs, just like you'd find in a can. But the story is a much more premium story. Even though the design is still relatively simple, you can tell that the brand personality is much more about special occasion. You're almost reaching for this out of convenience, but you're still trying to create that special occasion. Whereas our original hypothesis with Libre was that somebody who is reaching for a can, somebody on the beach or on a boat or on vacation, is really caring about the age of the rum itself. And I don't have hard and fast data, but I thought it would be reasonable to show you guys a product that I thought looked really killer. But we think the theory of the product market fit was wrong. So you can so there's that part. Now here's another RTD that we're working on as we speak. Let's go over to a product that we have in development called Future Paradise. I'm going to walk you through a little bit of a brand strategy meeting here. So this is a product that is going to have a little bit of THC in it. We're not really focused on THC today, but you can see how this informed our creative decision. We made this little chart of, okay, do we want this to be a product that tells more alcohol culture or more pot culture? Is it closer to something that looks like High Rise, Cheap and Fast, or something that looks like Breeze, which is slightly more premium? And we wanted it here in this upper right-hand quadrant, but we really wanted it to have this kind of like wild 90s inspiration, but also mix it with something that felt a little bit retro. So Havana Club is a really good example of this sort of big blocky retro style. This Volare also gives us a little bit of that inspiration, but we also had kind of this 90s graphic inspiration from it. We did a bunch of quick concepts like the ones you're going to see here. These are all just fast sketches trying to really nail down the personality and the identity. And we ended up arriving at a concept that, looked, let me see here, kind of like this. You can see the logo is, this kind of almost like Masonic pyramid thing. And that kind of scratched the itch for us, but not quite. Something wasn't right about it. So we had to go back to the drawing board. This is not the final art, but you can see how the path that we took from, all right, we want to be, slightly more alcohol culture than pot culture, but slightly more than, just a generic grocery store looking RTD, but still have something about it that differentiates it from a lot of other cocktails, because we've got this THC aspect to it and everything. So both of those are just really quick overviews of how this creative process works, and taking inspiration from, okay, what is our theory of the case? What is the unique value proposition? How do we get this in front of the customer? All right, we're going to go back here really quick. I recognize I'm talking quickly. I tend to do that. So whenever you are shopping for creative services, you need to ask yourself a little bit about what are you buying? And it could be all three of these columns that we already discussed. It could be the core brand assets. It could be the shelf presence. It could be the brand expression. And there could be sub-deliverables within each of those. Sometimes there is one agency that covers all three for you. Sometimes there's an agency that helps you think through your product strategy and your brand strategy and maybe a name, but they don't do any creative deliverables other than that. That's pretty rare, but that exists. Sometimes you'll have an agency that delivers just your core brand assets and they don't do packaging at all. Also rare, but that exists. We tend to focus on the first two, the core brand assets and the shelf presence, and then can help work with third parties to flesh out the brand expression where necessary. We do a lot of merchandise and such in-house, but let's say we wanted to shoot a commercial, we would partner with a video, focused digital agency or video agency or something like that. So whenever you are shopping for this, you need to be really clear about which of these chunks you are getting. And usually the more of those chunks you can get from one agency, the better. It just lets you have a shared vision for what you want this brand to be. So in the case of RTDs, the agency that is, or the partner that is helping you handle your product strategy and your naming and your identity design, ideally is also helping you with your packaging design and is helping to plan, how does this look on the shelf? What is your point of purchase like? What does this personality look like whenever it goes online, whenever it goes in video, things like that. So if you've never shopped for creative services before, the answer to what does it cost is as much as you want. At the very, very, very high end, you can hire a group like Stranger and Stranger, which is a really famous and excellent international creative agency. They've done work that you've seen everywhere from the most high end spirits shops to Target and everything in between. And just to sit down and have a conversation with them can be $20K. It could be a really, really valuable conversation to you, but they're really expensive high-end consultants, well over 6 figures to bring a full brand to life. At the other end of the spectrum, you can go on Fiverr and pay somebody $35 just for a logo, and you might get really lucky and get something that looks really cool. You might get lucky, but we're not really talking about that full brand development process. Another example is an agency called Kodo. They focus on, just as somewhere in the spectrum here, they also do really excellent work. They do a lot of beverage work. They will do this full brand development process that I'm talking about, and you're probably looking at about 100K or so starting for a full branded packaging suite, but that's going to be for a bunch of SKUs and you're going to get a bunch of stuff. It's really cool. I run what's called a distributed or a decentralized agency, which means I don't have any full-time employees. I have a network of specialists that I activate per project based on the needs of the project, of the client, and of the budget, so we can solve to a particular problem. We've worked with a lot of startups who have kind of a shoestring, and we figure out how to solve the problem they're trying to solve within a narrower budget. But we've also got clients that are really well funded. They want to blow the roof off, and so we can expand to do exactly that if that's what needs to be done. All right, so let's go to this next thing. Yes, at a bare minimum, whenever you're doing your core brand assets, you need to make sure you're getting that style guide we talked about and thinking through not just what does this product look like, but what does the product feel like across every touch point? How are we talking about it? What are the words we're using to describe it, etc. So what are you focusing on during this product for your RTD development? Well, for RTDs specifically, there are a couple things to really think about. Flavor understanding is one of the main things you're going to want to focus on whenever doing the brand development process specifically for RTDs. The best-selling SKU for RTDs almost universally is the mixed pack across all of the brands, whether it is, a seltzer RTD or, some other base. Their best-selling SKU is almost always the mixed pack. And I think that is because across the board, people are shopping for, flavor within the category. And so you've got something that's either really fruity or you've got just a lot of variety. So making sure that the customer doesn't have to decipher what's going on with your product because it's really confusing to understand, or it's unclear is this a high-end bespoke cocktail, or is this just, gin and pineapple juice or something? Having that really clear understanding for the customer up front is important. The second thing is this idea of a sense of place. I think this is true for all beverage brands, but specifically for RTDs. Each of these really successful RTD brands, they're able to have a winning sense of occasion. They're able to, whenever you look at the brand, immediately understand this is where I'm going to consume this. I'm going to either always have this in my fridge because I'm going to have it on a Tuesday night, or I'm going to always grab one of these on the way to a party, on the way to the lake, or on the way to vacation, or on the way to a graduation party or something. Having the idea, and again, this is not unique to RTDs. This is true for beverage brands generally, but RTDs need to make sure that this is an aspect of the brand. Where is this going to be consumed? Now, it is a little different than somebody, than targeting a traditional distillery or traditional spirits customer who might be a collector. I like this type of product. I hunt around this price point. I hunt for this particular age or this particular flavor profile. And then I'm going to have my dozen favorites that I always have on my shelf. The occasion that you're winning there is just you want to be on that guy's shelf. That's slightly different than an RTD where you're probably not having somebody who's collecting RTDs for their spirits cabinet, right? This is, you're trying to win a spot in their fridge, or a spot in their routine whenever they're on their way to a friend's house or a party or the lake or what have you. So that's sort of some RTD specific focuses. So why does any of this matter? Why does any of this brand development stuff matter? You're connecting with your customers is about, like we said at the top, pointing all of those aspects of your brand, your core assets, your shelf presence, your brand expression, all of those need to point the same way. Connecting with your customers is about this long walk in the same direction. Even though you're not necessarily the retailer, unless you're doing some online direct-to-consumer stuff, you're still effectively a direct-to-consumer brand. You are the one who's got to take ownership of that. A retailer is not going to do that for you. So what you're attempting to do through the whole process is develop an RTD brand that is memorable. It's aesthetically memorable. It's got language around it that's memorable. It's got a personality that you can remember. It's meaningful. This carries a specific meaning. We talked about flavor and we talked about sense of occasion or sense of place. And then eventually valuable. It's going to be in demand. This is something that is part of people's routine or has a space in someone's fridge always. Okay, we're going to hop over to the Q&A really quick. That was pre-provided by ADI. Like I said, everything I just talked about can be wrapped up in a PDF and sent over to you guys. We'll also have the video because I know I speak kind of quickly sometimes. But I want to get through some of this Q&A and then we can go over to the chat. So I'll read some of this. A lot of distilleries have strong brand recognition. How do you decide when an RTD should build on that existing brand versus creating something completely new? Okay, so the simple kind of cheeky answer is what I wrote. If you're targeting the same customer, you should build on your existing brand. That's kind of a cheeky answer. If the customer who is already buying your spirits is going to be the same person who is shopping for these RTDs, then yeah, let's build on that existing brand. And I expect that is something that is more like On the Rocks, where it's a little bit more bespoke, and they are depending on, your juice, as it were. You make a bourbon that has a solid fan base, and you want to do that bourbon plus. Well, then yes, we're going to build on that existing brand and treat it like a new product category or subcategory. If you expect to be targeting a totally different customer, new price point, new location, maybe your current products are in, spirits shops and you expect this new product to be in the grocery store. it would make a lot of sense to potentially treat that as something completely new. There might be a situation where you want to build on your existing brand equity, but treating that as a different customer and then trying to reverse engineer the answer from that makes more sense. Additionally, there's kind of a long-term play consideration where you might want to sell off one of those wings, and having them with different brand names is going to make that a lot easier than trying to split it after the fact. Okay, so let's say you are starting a brand from scratch. How do you get past the temptation to design the product around what the distillery owner personally likes? So this is a creative challenge that is obviously not unique to RTDs. It's not unique even to food and beverage brands. This is just a sort of a graphic design creative services challenge. The way we address it is we try to avoid talking about things like preference. We try to avoid having discussions that end with, do you like it or not? Because the answer to the do you like it question can be affected by what somebody had for lunch that day. What we are trying to do before we ever draw a logo or come up with a concept sketch for a packaging design is talk about our actual business challenges. What are the challenges we're trying to solve? What's our unique value proposition, and how do we best communicate that? Who's our target customer, and what are the types of brands that they already feel comfortable purchasing? What's our price point? What's the competition look like around that in both our price point and the given retail environments that we're going to be in? And then once we've agreed on, okay, this is what we're trying to communicate, this is some current ways others have communicated this successfully, do we think that there is a void in the way other people have talked about these brands that still answers the question? And then present our creative solutions as just that, solutions to a problem, and ideally avoid entirely the, do you prefer purple to orange? Because odds are, in our given context, purple might mean something to the customer that orange does not. And that would make one of those a better decision than the other based on what we're actually trying to communicate, regardless of whether I happen to like purple or like orange. So that's a pretty quick question, or a pretty quick answer to a very involved question. All right. RTD shelves are becoming incredibly crowded. What makes you stop and notice one can versus the 20 others sitting next to it? So back to the previous answer, we do something called hunting for voids, where we will look at the actual shelf that we are likely to sit. It could be at Total Wine. It could be at our local grocery store, and say, all right, what are the products that we're going to be sitting next to? Does it make sense for us to zig when everybody's zagging? If everybody's got a lot of, bright colors, do we need to do a dark color? That's sort of a practical, sort of the simplest expression of what we're trying to do. But we're also trying to make components of the packaging that in and of themselves are pretty memorable. So even if they did, use a light color palette and others are using a light color palette, it would be easy to identify something about that is memorable. You could see it across the aisle. Before you could necessarily read every fine word, you could still identify something about it, and that something should carry meaning. That meaning could be as simple as, oh, hey, this is a bright, fun, bold personality, or it could be something about flavor, or it could be something about, that connects with another brand that we've already got, something like that. How early in the process should packaging enter the brand strategy conversation? Pretty much once you've decided to do this thing, we need to start talking about format. Can versus glass, for example, but also how do we want this brand to look and feel is right at the beginning of that brand strategy, figuring out the problems that we're trying to solve. How are we going to communicate our solutions to those problems? So I pretty much tell my clients, it's really difficult to call me too early or come up with a creative partner too early, especially if you're still working out your product strategy. We don't know if we're going to do 14 margaritas or we're going to do one margarita and a bunch of other classic cocktails or whatever. Next question. Should you know what the can is going to look like before you finalize the brand positioning, or should the packaging come later? So it goes in the other order. Brand positioning is first. You can put that next to product strategy, brand strategy, what is the story that we're telling about our unique value proposition? We want to have identified that and the customer that we're trying to sell it to before we do any creative at all, before we ever put pen to paper to start sketching a logo, potentially even before we have a name. Now, if you're in a situation like we talked about earlier, where we're going to extend on an existing spirits brand or a distillery brand, so be it. That might already be part of something that we know is a continuing factor, but that might be a sub name, or it might be a series name, something like that. We want to have a good idea of that positioning and our unique value proposition even before we have necessarily cooked up a name. So we do a fair bit of naming too. What are some examples of RTD branding that you think gets the balance right between communicating this comes from a distillery and this is a modern RTD product? So that question assumes that there's a balance to be struck. Maybe there is, but that's not necessarily the right balance for every brand. For instance, the mega grocery store brands, White Claw and Truly and High Noon, they don't care about communicating this comes from a distillery. That's not part of their story at all. This goes back to the who's the customer question. You might not care to communicate, this is a modern hip RTD that sits right next to High Noon or something. That might not be part of your story. You might be selling convenience to a customer who already likes your products, but you don't have to necessarily reach out to someone who's weighing you against a grocery store RTD. So there might be a balance that you need to strike for your brand, but maybe not. I don't want to, we shouldn't assume that there's necessarily a balance to be struck. For a smaller distillery with a limited creative budget, where do they spend their money first? So those first two columns, core brand assets, shelf presence, and then also photography. I wouldn't spend tens of thousands of dollars on a fancy website, or trying to hire immediately some particular influencer necessarily right out of the gate. I have often talked to people who are starting up new brands, and they've said, hey, should I spend $20,000 on this custom website or that same money on video and photography? And the answer is video and photography. And for now, use Squarespace. And we often will style and use Squarespace for websites just right out of the gate that will look really killer because they decided to spend their money on killer video and photography, even if the website itself is really simple. And so we don't have to spend tens of thousands of dollars designing some unique web experience, especially if you are going to be selling these in some of the newer, direct-to-consumer platforms. They can use Shopify or Squarespace to basically the frame to power these online e-commerce experiences. Okay, you mentioned that aluminum printing decisions should be based on volume, creative strategy, and budget. What mistakes do you see brands making when choosing their packaging method? So shelf presence, that's that middle column, is about setting expectation. Whenever you walk down the pasta sauce aisle in the grocery store, you can tell what the most expensive pasta sauce is before you ever see a number. You can tell based on the printing techniques, the glass, the illustration, and where it sits on the shelf. That also helps too. But even if you didn't have that as a clue, just seeing the product without the number, you could usually 9 times out of 10 order those products on a shelf in order of price. And making that decision about printing techniques, whether it's traditional offset printing or digital, things like that, if they need to match the expectation that you're going to be setting with your pricing as well. So if you have a really expensive product, but you are in a aluminum can that has a low cost sticker label applied to it, that's going to be a jarring expectation disruption for the customer. It's not going to make sense. Similarly, in reverse, if you have a product that looks like it should be incredibly premium and you've spared no expense on your production techniques, but it actually doesn't cost very much, that'll still be kind of jarring. That's not immediately oh, what a great value perception. It might be in a given situation, but you have to weigh this sort of expectation setting. Obviously, volume is part of it. You just have to meet certain minimums to do certain techniques. But the meta decision is, does this communicate the expectation we're trying to set for our product when it sits on the shelf? All right, next, if a new RTD isn't connecting with customers after 6 months or so, how do you know what the problem is? The brand, the liquid, the price, the distribution, or overall market positioning? Yeah, this is a tough one. So a really good distributor partner usually has their finger on the pulse here. They, are usually talking to both customers and retailers, and if it's the product itself, and they're getting a lot of feedback that, hey, this stuff just isn't really like amazingly delicious, or this is fine, but you're charging twice as much for it. Usually those type of like technical things, a really good distributor is going to have their finger on the pulse of that. But you're basically at that point going to be experimenting with one variable at a time. It's common to experiment with the easiest variable up front, which is often price. But it might be a situation where, this customer, doesn't want to experience this product in a can, but that's a really difficult thing to evaluate after the fact. So maybe you run 2 pilots. You might run a small can pilot and a small glass pilot. That's that in and of itself would be a whole additional conversation. So I'm going to pause. I've done a lot of talking very quickly. Let's go to, we do have one more page of questions. Sorry about that. How should a distillery think about building an RTD brand that can grow beyond its first product? For example, if they launched a canned margarita, what should they be thinking about if they eventually want 5 or 10 different RTDs? So as a creative agency, even if we're hired to design a single SKU from jump, we always like to begin with the end in mind. So we think a little bit about our product strategy. How would this product fit in a series of all margaritas? Or how would this fit in a series of classic cocktails, or a series of tequila-based products, or what have you? So thinking, actually doing the concept work behind, okay, this is the path this brand could take if you find that, your tequila-based products really take off. And this is the way this thing could grow. So it's important to design in such a way where we've got the end in mind. It's pretty common for a distillery to have a general idea of their strengths and know this is probably the way we're going to go. But you might launch with 2 or 3 or 4 recipes. Not a bad idea if you want to have a mixed pack, because like we said, the mixed pack is often the number 1 selling SKU. But if 1 or 2 of those ends up really taking off, that might spark its own series. If you were sitting down with a distillery tomorrow that has a recipe but hasn't done any branding yet, what are the first 3 questions you'd ask them before you design anything? Well, I'd just send them our brand questionnaire. I can actually send that to everybody who's attending this thing if you want, just to take a look at it. Even if we never work together, it would be a useful resource so you can start thinking about the questions that inform our brand strategy process. The point of the brand questionnaire is not to answer every single question with an essay. The point is to spark that thought process, thinking about where's this brand going to live, who's the competition, all of these various details that we've already talked about. Okay, I've done a bunch of talking. I'm going to go back to I'm going to stop sharing here. Let's go back to this chat and see if there's anything else that I need to address. All right. Brandon, is there anything that stood out to you that that I want to address before I start going through this? Is there a public chat?
We can see, just real quick, folks. If you've got a question for Joshua, feel free to just type it in there in the chat, and we can address it and answer it. So fire away on the questions. I guess for me, with everything you've talked about, to be honest, I don't like RTDs. I've had very few of them that I thought tasted good. And the ones that tasted good actually came from, craft distilleries. So they're always just a little too sweet. But I think one big thing for me as a consumer is when you go and you look at them, it's like, oh, a 4-pack for $15. And while the ABV in it is high, that's a high price point. So do you know if there's a sweet spot for pricing on, you mentioned the variety packs, right? Taking high noon out, but for craft distilleries, what would be a a marketing perspective, what would be a good price point to try to keep within when you're developing an RTD?
I don't have a number for you. I mean, that's a pretty tough question. If you are, it is very difficult for a craft distillery to come up with an RTD product in a can that's going to go head to head with, your high noons like you're talking about. And so I think that is why you have seen recently more success with some of these craft distilleries going back into glass, even for an RTD, because it it no longer feels like a beer alternative. Now, this is a hypothesis. We'll see if this is borne out over time. But the person who is reaching for the RTD is usually reaching for flavor, right? Like, I want something that tastes like X, not I want a spirit that's been aged 7 years, right? Or even 3, right? Which is why I was saying, flavor first. So even a craft distillery might have the operations in place and the processes in place to make an absolutely killer RTD. But if their, dedication is to this, really perfectly aged or blended product, that might be too expensive to put into a can, and they might just source juice somewhere else, but decide we have enough know-how of retailing these products that it still makes sense for us to do, even if it's not even our alcohol in it. That's kind of a roundabout answer to your question. I don't have a sweet spot number. I've just seen the positioning switch from, hey, there's really high-end alcohol in this can, to actually, this is for a special occasion. Now, even though it's an RTD, we're selling you some convenience, but this isn't just like a more expensive version of Truly. Somebody in the chat did say, any difference between alcoholic and non-alcoholic? Yeah, there you go. So often, I'm actually working with one of my clients. We did actually, like a home style, for example, will eventually have a non-alcoholic version of that. Often those products end up not being on the shelf right next to each other, which you might have noticed in a retail environment. So even if you have the same brand, having, product A and then product A non-alcoholic, it's cool to think of them as sitting right next to each other, and like one's a version of the other one, and that is true, but they usually don't end up getting retailed together. It is a slightly different customer who is shopping for the other. So it's okay to stretch a little bit. It doesn't have to just be, the slightly different colored version of product A. So that's something to consider if you're doing a non-alcoholic version. Some people just cook up RTDs that are non-alcoholic. That's the whole pitch. There's no alcoholic version of the same thing. It's just its own non-alcoholic brand, which is a really interesting way to think about it, because again, they're retailed in a slightly different location to a slightly different customer. All right, another question here from Jeff. Okay, how frequently do you recommend clients conduct consumer research to help answer some of the key development questions with the key triggers to the recommendation? I assume you're chatting about some product that's already in the market. So usually, like, your distributors are going to tell you if you are having it, or your retailers, if you are having a difficult time, meeting previous sales numbers, if your sales are going down, or if you put together like a really aggressive plan to enter a new market and it just didn't go off, usually numbers are going to tell you that. I typically only get hired whenever there is some type of change, 95% of the time. And that change is either new product or new market or a repositioning of an existing brand. We're going to change price point. We're going to change geography. We're going to change positioning, or whatever. New ownership, new name. Any of these things where there is some type of significant change is whenever I get hired. And sometimes that change is because of the numbers that I was just talking about. Sales aren't there, or some particular category has changed, or we've really tried to grow X, Y, and Z, and it's just not happening. So I don't know that frequency, like every 6 months, something like that might not actually be very helpful. It tends to be whenever the numbers are showing evidence that whatever we got going on isn't connecting on some level.
I have a question for the audience. I think this kind of helps steer it because we've got about 10 people on. I see a couple of my suppliers. But if you're on here and you're either, do you have an RTD? Are you looking for an RTD? You're clearly on this because you're interested in it. But what, I guess, the question is like, what's driving you to want to produce an RTD for the audience? So if you've got an answer for that, put it in the chat. Let us see it. I'm interested to see like what's driving you towards researching this decision. While we Christian said we have an alc non-alc RTD. Our branding sucks.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry to hear that, but we can help with that. Out of curiosity, Christian, are your non-alcoholic products non-alcoholic variations of your existing products, or are they a totally separate series or like totally separate even brand name? Might have lost Christian. It's okay.
Oh, yeah. Give him some time to
sure
type.
So one of the things that I will do, if anybody else is answering it, I can go ahead and put this together as a PDF, and I think the video will be made available. So all those little fine details, if you want to read all the intricate details of the behind the scenes, that's totally something that you guys can do. Christian said, I also have $0 budget for it. That would be tough. You'd need to have some really skilled in-house talent to pull that off. Well, let's see. And then separate but similar ideas. Okay, so it sounds like it's not merely product A and then product A non-alc. Maybe a connected brand. Okay, and then Jeff says, have you seen RTD success that sparks consumption of the core spirits product? That's actually super interesting. I don't know that I've seen it like some sort of case study success story in that direction. Like nothing comes to mind as some kind of headline that I've seen or something that I've observed. Most of the really successful RTDs are RTD brands in and of themselves. They're not, they might. There are some, where Jack Daniels puts one out, but that's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about these other RTDs. Usually they are not connected to some other craft distillery brand. Okay, so Christian said, yes, it's different customers for us. Yeah, that makes total sense. That, usually one customer is not buying product A and then product A non-alcoholic to sit on, both of them sit in their fridge. That's typically the case. And that's one of the reasons why I was saying it's fine to sort of spread your wings there.
I mean, for me, one of the best RTDs I had came from a craft distillery, and I ran into them at Total Wine, and they had their bourbon, and I think it pushed me to try their bourbon as well. I didn't go buy a bottle of it, but I think for craft, I think that's where you separate from High Noon, right? Is that like you can easily build that connection between like, this is made with if you use your spirit in that RTD, you can then draw that back to have a conversation about, well, have you tried this neat? Have you tried this in a cocktail? Like we you like the RTDs when you're out on the river, out on the boat, going to barbecue. I think for RTDs, that's a strength for them, is to kind of build that, if you're using your spirit in that RTD, of bridging that gap and starting that conversation with your consumers of, you liked it, so you like the spirits in it, now try the spirit neat or with something else.
Yeah, you are in that scenario, you are trying to sell an RTD to somebody that you already know would buy bourbon or buy whatever your spirit is, which is not the play that the like macro RTDs are making, right? They are selling to people who are not ever going to buy a 750. They are only buying this like flavor forward beer substitute.
Do you think, I mean, for me, like, because the newer generation, very health conscious, studies show people are not drinking as much. I talk to people who are in a bar every night pouring their spirits, and they think that those are lies because every bar is full. So, I guess for me, like when you look at like the health conscious moving forward with all these mass produced RTDs with artificial flavorings, artificial colors, things like that. Again, from a craft perspective, if you're not looking to be nationwide in thousands of stores, for me, again, it's that strength of being like, here's what's in ours. We're cleaner. I don't want to say better for you because I don't think you could actually say that, but separating out from the big boys like High Noon, looking at it from that perspective, that might there be a decline in the future of people going like, that's got what in it? Lime substitute, whatever they want to call it, cornstarch.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, there was an idea that people would not stop drinking cocktails because of the sugar, because when they drank, they didn't count calories. Even people who were very physically fit don't count calories when they drink. And that was true 10 years ago. It is not proven to be true now. Like, sugar-based calories are like the thing that people look out for, seemingly. And so, which is why you have this whole subcategory of even RTDs that are like very low calorie, right? They're saying low sugar, low calorie. And so I think that you might be right that even though right now there's not necessarily a backlash against sort of sugar substitutes, could there be in a while? And could this be an opportunity for a traditionally distilled RTD that doesn't have a bunch of artificial sweeteners in it or artificial flavors in it to claim like a unique value proposition? That could absolutely be the case. I obviously don't know the future. I can't say if that's the way it's going to go, but based on the way that like sugar went, yeah, you could absolutely have a contingent that is extra sensitive to that. I doubt that you'll ever be able to make like a calories claim and compete on that, but competing on something else, like this sort of lack of artificial ingredients. So Jeff says, is this really a durable category, or is this just the latest ZMO, Bartles and James, etc.? I have absolutely no way of knowing. I have no tools by which to evaluate that, unfortunately. Brandon,
that's
you
a hard
might
thing
feel
to
differently. You might, go ahead.
I know. I just say that that's a hard thing to answer. I mean, I don't have the knowledge of it from our end to say what it is. I read the same reports. I see that it's growing. We see that it's growing. More people are dipping into it. And that goes back to what we were just talking about. Like, is it, in 2-3 years, are we going to see RTDs, drop off the face of the earth or not? I don't know. I don't know what the world holds for us. Any other questions about RTD branding or getting stuff, branding in general? We can we can open it up. Josh has done a couple webinars on us on branding and label designs and things like that. So I know he's happy to answer anything you guys might have while we're on here.
And additionally, I can email everybody who's on the webinar with those links that we talked about. And if you have any other questions that you might not want to just open to the room, but you want to ask specifically, I'd be happy to do my best to answer them for you. Maybe we are a good fit for whatever your specific needs are, or maybe not. Maybe you've got a question or a need, but I might know somebody who actually, man, this person does X, Y, or Z really, really well, and that's exactly what you guys need. I could be able to help you out. That's one of the benefits of being in the field and working with a bunch of different subcontractors is sometimes there's a really specific need that somebody has, and I can put them in touch with the right person. But yeah, if there's nothing else, I really appreciate you guys giving me the time to come speak today.
Yeah. Josh, thank you guys. Thank you always. I think, you come on, you bring good energy for a webinar, keep people entertained and keep people engaged. So that's great. And I think, branding is something for me that craft distilleries might not have the budget for, don't have the team for, but is such a vital role and has to be, you know, discussed. So I appreciate you taking the time to answer questions and give your expertise on branding for RTDs and cans and things. Josh, thank you again so much for joining us, and have a great week.
Of course. Have a great one.